It's Drybear. And as you all well may know, I am someone who's a serial alcoholic and I like to play absolutely everything. So coming back into New World for the Rise of the Angry Earth expansion, figuring out what weapons I want to use has been a challenge for me. So today I want to talk through how to pick your main weapon and how to pick your offhand weapon, what the weapons look like and why they're different. My focus for this video is not to give you the best combinations, the best builds, or the most meta, because all of that can change. Just more about the theory so you can arm yourself with knowledge and choose the weapons that you think are the most fun and fit your playstyle the best. I'm going to keep it simple and just talk about this on the attribute screen because I think this is the fundamental decision maker for what you're going to do with the weapons themselves. And a lot of people get tripped up on what's a good combination, how to make my class, and honestly, making a game like this where you can kind of build your own class is fun for a lot of people, but there are people out there that get stuck on this. Like, well, what do I do? How do I theme? What I put together? Can I mix this with that? So we'll start with some basic fundamental knowledge on how the world and gameplay for New World functions so you can understand how to put together your main and secondary weapon combo. You will be given about 500 or 505 total stats to allocate however you want between these stats that you see on screen: strength, dexterity, intelligence, focus, and constitution. Constitution gives you durability and HP in many cases, and the other stats will do major things with these breakpoints, but primarily for this video, we're focused on how they impact the weapons. Now, if you press K on PC and bring up your stats screen, you'll notice that each of these stats has the icon for weapons shown next to them. And that's because every weapon in the game scales with a stat or two different stats that scales its damage output and its efficacy overall. And some weapons scale with two different stats. As you can see that the spear here appears in both the strength category and also appears in the dexterity category. The rapier appears in dexterity and intelligence, so on and so forth. For the weapons that are split stat, like they have multiple stats, they usually get the majority of their stats from a primary stat and some stat benefit from the secondary. So you can see this kind of with the shading or the highlighting of the icon. So in the case of the greatsword, you can see it's kind of more colored in and more detailed and shaded on strength and a little bit more faded on dexterity. And that's because its primary stat technically is strength, and same thing for spear. It's more shaded and colored with dexterity and a little bit more faded with strength because dexterity is its primary stat, which that's the stat that it's going to get the most value from. But from this, you can already figure out how a build might be put together. You want to maximize putting as much value into your stats as you can and make sure that both your weapons, to the best of your ability, can scale from the stat allocation that you have. So for example, if you wanted to get max dexterity, you would want to pick from weapons that scale primarily from dexterity to get value out of that. One of the most common versions of this is going to be using the bow and the spear together because they're both primary stat dexterity weapons and they do a good job of building off of each other. One's melee, one's ranged, and you can have that combination of weapons into one mixture. Now, the maximum for each stat is 350, and this is combined with the points that you allocate to it and your gear and buffs and bonuses, all of that put together. So you will have extra points to put into another stat, which is why the dual stat weapons work so well in rounding out builds. You could go with 300 dexterity and 200 strength, and then you can put a little bit extra into constitution to fill that up as well. So you can have that kind of concept of splitting the stats out and then pick weapons that go along with that. If you're going mostly dexterity with strength as an offhand, that works great with spear and greatsword, for example, because then you're going to get scaling on both those stats for greatsword and scaling on both those stats for spear, so they're going to do quite well together. That's the first thing to know, is how you're going to distribute your stats and how to collect them together, and this might help you decide on what weapons to pick in the first place, right? You might go sword and shield and great axe because then those work perfectly with strength in general. You can max out your strength, get a little bit of other stats for bonuses and benefits, maybe even put more in constitution, and you got yourself a build. And this might narrow your choices down based on the actual build of putting the stats together themselves. The next thing to consider is the style of content you're going to be doing as well. PvP, PvE, group PvE, solo PvE, leveling, all of those things have different implications on the weapons you pick and will have different choices based on how you're going to be part of that activity. However, despite the very flexible nature of the class system in New World, it still does fall under the typical triad or trinity system for roles: tank, DPS, and healer. If you plan to tank, your best bet is to include a shield, and there are only two weapons in the game now with Rise of Angry Earth that utilize the shield. It has the sword and shield and the flail and shield. And these are typically looked at as primary tank weapons because having a shield means you can block ranged attacks without any penalties. You also get a bunch of extra armor and block and other bonuses that come along with having that shield in general. So if you're looking to tank in PvE or in some cases PvP as well, I would start there and kind of work your build from that, which means that you're going to be primarily a strength build and you're going to be using the sword and shield or the flail and shield, but then what weapon you choose in your offhand depends on the activity and your preferences. For healer, there are 2 or 3 weapons to focus on depending on who you talk to here. I think primarily you still have the life staff and the void gauntlet as your primary support / healing weapons. These things have a ton of healing. The life staff probably is the number one to have there, but you can mix it into other builds as well. And you can also use the void gauntlet for support / support DPS and things like that. And typically the most common healing build is using life staff and void gauntlet, either the void gauntlet as your main or the life staff as your main, depending on whether you're more support DPS or more full healing for the group. Which is great because both those scale well with focus. You can see Void Gauntlet also gets a little benefit coming from intelligence as well. However, there is a new weapon, the flail, that does have some healing on it, though I think most people would agree that it's better used as a tank weapon than as a healing weapon, though I have been messing around with it as a healing weapon because you can get some pretty decent healing out of it and work with a life staff as your offhand and kind of mess around in that well. When it comes to DPS, sky's the limit. You could be intelligence, dexterity, or strength focused. You could have a mixture of weapons. You could go with bow, spear is a very common one. Bow with greatsword is a very common one. You could do greatsword, great axe as a common one. Hatchet, great axe is another common one, but really you can just pick your main weapon, the weapon that you want to use, and then pick another weapon that rounds that weapon out nicely, gives you either ranged options if you're focused on melee or melee options if you're focused on ranged, and give you nice buffs and things that synergize well with the stats you're going to have in general. There's also specialized situations that you might find some really fun combinations to put together. For example, I really like running bow and musket in PvP because I like ranged weapons and it's hard to run these usually, especially in mutations or expo dungeons using both of these together. But in PvP, it's great because it gives you a lot of flexibility and movement. You can get traps or sticky bombs with the musket, use the bow in medium to short range, musket in long range, and kind of play around that way. And you can also just make your own build as you go along with it. I would encourage you not to let the typical meta or discussions around what works and what doesn't to limit you from your choices here, and to really just play around with the weapons that you may like. So if you ask me in 2023, if I was new to New World and I wanted to pick a weapon combination, how would I do it? The first thing I would do is I would go and I would experiment with a bunch of weapons, just like every couple levels, switch around, try something out, mess around with it, level it a little bit, get some abilities, respec it while it's free, try every weapon and see what feels good, see what doesn't, or get some ideas in your head of what you may or may not want to do. And then pick a main weapon. Just pick a weapon that you like, that fits your play style, that fits into the DPS, healer, or tank meta that you may want to think about, like that role idea that you want to fit, and then just mess around with your secondary weapons. Once you have a main weapon chosen, figure out what stat it scales best with and put all your points into that and make your build around it. And then just mess around with secondary weapons to see what it affords you and what it works and fills the holes and gaps in your playstyle for that main weapon. And you can slot those out for different activities as well. And it helps you master your main weapon on top of it. And I hope that's short and it helps you pick your weapon if you're jumping into New World. If you found value in the video, leave a like down below, leave a comment for the algorithm to help this video get seen by more people. And I'll see you on my live stream. If you enjoyed yourself today, leave a like down below. You can support me and my work on Patreon and view Patreon exclusive content, link in the description. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next one.